Thank you, Senator Nelson. Would now like to welcome each of our expert witnesses. Thank you for coming to testify to this panel. First witness is Dr. John Christie. Dr. John Christie is a distinguished professor of atmospheric science at the University of Alabama in Huntsville and is Alabama's state climatologist. He's been awarded NASA's Medal for Exceptional Scientific Achievement, was elected a Fellow of the American Meteorological Society, which also selected him for the Special Award for building climate data sets from satellites, and served as lead author of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Beginning as a teenager, Dr. Christie has studied climate for the past 50 years. Dr. Judith Curry currently serves as a professor and is former chair of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the Georgia Institute of Technology, in addition to serving as president of Climate Forecast Applications Network. Dr. Curry received a Ph.D. in atmospheric science from the University of Chicago. Dr. Curry has recently served on the NASA Advisory Council Earth Science Subcommittee, the DOE Biological and Environmental Research Advisory Committee, the National Academy's Climate Research Committee, and the Space Studies Board, and the NOAA Climate Working Group. Dr. Curry is a Fellow of the American Meteorological Society, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the American Geophysical Union. Dr. William Happer currently serves as a Cyrus Fogg Brackett Professor of Physics at my alma mater, Princeton University, and has spent most of his professional life studying the interactions of visible and infrared radiation with gases, one of the main physical phenomena behind the greenhouse effect. Throughout his career, he has published over 200 papers in peer-reviewed scientific journals and is a member of a number of professional organizations, including the American Physical Society and the National Academy of Sciences. Dr. Happer also served as the Director of Energy Research at the Department of Energy from 1990 to 1993, where he supervised all of DOE's work on climate change. Mr. Mark Stein is an international best-selling author, a top 5 jazz recording artist, and a leading Canadian human rights activist. Mr. Stein recently contributed to the #1 climatology bestseller, Climate Change, The Facts, and edited another #1 climatology bestseller, A Disgrace to the Profession, The World's Scientists in Their Own Words, on Michael Mann, His Hockey Stick, and Their Damage to Science, Volume 1. In his capacity as a human rights activist, Mr. Stein's human rights campaign to restore free speech to Canada led to the repeal by Parliament of the notorious Section 12 hate speech law, a battle he recounts in his books, Lights Out, Islam, Free Speech, and the Twilight of the West. And then Dr. David Titley, who Senator Nelson mentioned already. Dr. Titley currently serves as Professor of Practice in the Department of Meteorology at the Pennsylvania State University, and is the founding director of Penn State's Center for Solutions to Weather and Climate Risk. Dr. Titley holds a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology from the Pennsylvania State University. From the Naval Postgraduate School, he earned a Master's of Science in Meteorology and Physical Oceanography and a Ph.D. in Meteorology. Prior to joining Penn State, Dr. Titley served as a naval officer for 32 years and rose to the rank of Rear Admiral. His career included duties as commander, Naval Meteorologist and Oceanography Command, Oceanographer and Navigator of the Navy, and Deputy Assistant Chief of Naval Operations for Information Dominance. He has also served as Senior Military Assistant for the Director, Net Assessment in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. While serving in the Pentagon, Dr. Titley initiated and led the U.S. Navy's task force on climate change. After retiring from the Navy, Dr. Titley served as the Deputy Undersecretary of Commerce for Operations, the chief operating position at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. The final witness that we had hoped to have today is Mr. Aaron Mayer, the president of the Sierra Club. I would note a number of weeks ago, Mr. Mayor was witness at another hearing that I chaired in the Oversight Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee. This was a hearing concerning the effect of overregulation on minority communities, and in particular the devastating impacts of overregulation in the Obama administration on the Hispanic community and the African American community. There were a host of witnesses that testified to the job losses, to the stagnating wages as a consequence of overregulation from the federal government. Mr. Mayor was one of the witnesses, a minority witness invited by the Democrats. Mr. Mayor's testimony concerned global warming. In the course of that hearing, I asked Mr. Mayor about the scientific basis for his testimony. In particular, I asked him how he responded to the fact that the satellite data demonstrate no significant warming whatsoever for the past 18 years. Mr. Mayor, by all appearances, did not have the foggiest idea what the satellite data demonstrated. Indeed, he repeatedly turned to his staff members behind him and was unable to answer even basic questions. At the conclusion of the questioning, my friend, the ranking Democrat on the committee, Senator Chris Coons, stepped to Mr. Mayor's defense. And he said, in fact, I will read his quote directly. Senator Coons said, "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just simply wanted to observe that we have a broadly representative and qualified group of folks who were brought here to talk about overregulation and its impact on minority communities. And I do not speak for the Sierra Club, obviously, but it is my hope and expectation that if you want to pursue that line of inquiry with them further, they would be happy to." At that suggestion from Democratic Senator Coons that we hold a subsequent hearing on global warming, we have announced this hearing. Now, I did note at the time that the entire substance of Mr. Mayor's both written and oral testimony to the subcommittee concerned global warming, and yet he was unprepared to discuss even the basic science behind what he was testifying to. My office reached out to Mr. Mayor and invited him to come testify in this panel, and we did so in consultation with the chairman of the full committee, Senator Thune. Mr. Mayor turned down that invitation. And so, without objection, I'd like to enter into the record the written correspondence, the email between my office and Mr. Mayor extending the invitation, and the Sierra Club's response to that, declining to attend. In Mr. Mayor's honor, we have a spot at the table for him. I would note that it is striking the Sierra Club, a national advocacy organization that devotes the lion's share of its energy to advocating for global warming, was unwilling to come and defend the merits of its position based on the science or the data to any fair or impartial observer. The Sierra Club's refusal even to engage in a discussion of the science should speak volumes. And with that, Dr. Christie, we're ready to receive your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz and Ranking Member Peters and Ranking Member Nelson, for this opportunity to speak about climate change. I'm John Christie, Professor of Atmospheric Science at the University of Alabama in Huntsville and Alabama State climatologist. I've served in many climate science capacities, including lead authorship of the United Nations IPCC. I, along with Dr. Curry, have the distinction of being 2 of the 7 scientists targeted by Representative Grijalva for investigation because our views about climate change differ from those of the administration. My research might best be described as building data sets from scratch for 50 years to help us understand what the climate is doing and what it might do and why it does what it does. The 2 main points of my verbal testimony are simple. First, the basis on which the popular view that human-caused climate change is dangerous does not pass simple validation tests. Secondly, the attempt to study climate change with an objective eye is thwarted by the federal funding process. Now, we at UAH monitor climate change for such variables as temperature. However, no one has a direct means to tell us why the temperature changes. Our thermometers only tell us what has happened. They do not tell us why it happened. There is really no way to prove why climate does what it does. No, so to try to understand why the changes occur, we make claims or hypotheses using climate models whose equations attempt to approximate all the important factors that affect the climate. If these equations are accurate, we can then see how each factor, such as greenhouse gases or volcanoes, might affect the climate, and therefore we could learn what the cause of these changes might be. Now, one variable, according to climate models, that has the largest response to extra greenhouse gases is the temperature of the bulk atmosphere, and this is the layer from the surface to about 50,000 feet in altitude. As shown in my written testimony, and as you can see on the chart to my left, the models fail this very simplest of validation tests. They can't even reproduce what has already happened in the past 37 years. 102 climate model runs warm up the bulk layer of the atmosphere by an average factor of 3 more than what has actually occurred. Now, being off by a factor of 3 does not qualify as settled science, in my view. Now, why are studies like this so hard to find? It goes back to this, the way federal funding occurs. Today, contrarian proposals, such as one I might write, that wants to say, look rigorously and test climate models against reality, or to test various ideas about how natural variability causes these changes, are rarely, if ever, funded. This is due to the fact the panels which decide this type of funding are dominated by those with the establishment point of view about dangerous climate change. Since there are many more proposals than funding allows, a contrarian proposal has essentially no chance of receiving funding because the panel decides these things by votes. Now, in my view, Congress needs to fix this problem by directly funding red teams, which are not part of the climate modeling industry, to test the basis for the claims that human-induced climate change is dangerous. The Congress needs objective eyes on this issue because it is such a big-ticket item for everyone involved. Now, it is no secret that the state of Alabama is in a desperate fight with the federal EPA. Our elected officials understand, as do I, their state climatologists, that the regulations being established will do nothing to alter whatever the climate is going to do. In fact, even if the United States of America disappeared today, no people, no cars, no factories, the impact would be negligible on whatever the climate does. Alabama is fighting for our industries, which are being tempted by lower costs in Mexico and China, where their emissions would actually rise if they move there. We are fighting for our utilities, which sell over 30% of their electricity production to nearby states who need it. And we are fighting for the many poor people in our state who do not need another hike in their utility rates to satisfy a regulation whose only impact will be to further drain their meager resources. This is a time when even so-called green countries like Germany and Japan, that's Germany and Japan, are adding to their carbon emissions by building more coal-fired power plants, while the rest of the world moves toward more carbon-based energy. To me, it is not scientifically justifiable or economically rational that this nation should establish regulations whose only discernible consequence is an increase in economic pain visited most directly and harshly on the poorest among us. This happens when the scientific process that allegedly underpins regulations lacks objectivity and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christie. At this point in the hearing is when Mr. Aaron Mayer, the President of the Sierra Club, would be afforded his opportunity to present the Sierra Club's views on global warming. Unfortunately, as we discussed a minute ago, even though he was invited to present the Sierra Club's views, he chose not to attend, and presumably one reason for that is the last time he presented testimony on this topic, he was unable to answer even the most basic questions on the scientific basis for the political theory he was advancing that we should massively increase the federal government regulation of the economy and dramatically drive up the cost of living, the electricity bills of millions of hardworking Americans. And so we will not be hearing from Mr. Mayer now. Instead, we will hear from Dr. Curry.
I thank the chairman and the ranking members for the opportunity to offer testimony today. Prior to 2009, I felt that supporting the IPCC consensus on climate change was a responsible thing to do. I bought into the argument, don't trust what one scientist says, trust what an international team of 1,000 scientists has said after years of careful deliberation. That all changed for me in November 2009 following the leaked ClimateGate emails that illustrated the sausage making and even bullying that went into building the consensus. I started speaking out, saying that scientists needed to do better at making the data and supporting information publicly available, being more transparent about how they reach conclusions, doing a better job of assessing uncertainties, and actively engaging with scientists having minority perspectives. The response of my colleagues to this is summed up by the title of a 2010 article in the Scientific American. Climate heretic Judith Curry turns on her colleagues. I came to the growing realization that I had fallen into the trap of groupthink. I had accepted the consensus based on second-order evidence, the assertion that a consensus existed. I began making an independent assessment of topics in climate science that had the most relevance to policy. And what have I concluded from this assessment? Human-caused climate change is a theory in which the basic mechanism is well understood, but whose magnitude is highly uncertain. No one questions that surface temperatures have increased overall since 1880, or that humans are adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, or that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases have a warming effect on the planet. However, there is considerable uncertainty and disagreement about the most consequential issues, whether the warming has been dominated by human causes versus natural variability, how much the planet will warm in the 21st century, and whether warming is dangerous. The central issue in the scientific debate on climate change is the extent to which the recent and future warming is caused by humans versus natural climate variability. Research effort and funding has focused on understanding human causes of climate change. However, we have been misled in our quest to understand climate change by not paying sufficient attention to natural causes of climate variability, in particular from the sun and from the long-term oscillations in ocean circulations. Why do scientists disagree about climate change? The historical data is sparse and inadequate. There's disagreement about the value of different classes of evidence, notably the value of global climate models. There's disagreement about the appropriate logical framework for linking and assessing the evidence. And scientists disagree over assessments of areas of ambiguity and ignorance. How then and why have climate scientists come to a consensus about a very complex scientific problem that the scientists themselves acknowledge has substantial and fundamental uncertainties? Climate scientists have become entangled in an acrimonious political debate that has polarized the scientific community. As a result of my analyses that challenge IPCC conclusions, I have been called a denier by other climate scientists, and most recently by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. My motives have been questioned by Representative Grijalva in a recent letter sent to the president of Georgia Tech. There is enormous pressure for climate scientists to conform to the so-called consensus. This pressure comes not only from politicians, but from federal funding agencies, universities and professional societies, and scientists themselves who are green activists. Reinforcing this consensus are strong monetary, reputational, and authority interests. In this politicized environment, advocating for carbon dioxide emissions reductions is becoming the default, expected position for climate scientists. This advocacy extends to the professional society that publish journals and organize conference. Policy advocacy, when combined with understating the uncertainties, risks destroying science's reputation for honesty and objectivity, without which scientists become regarded as merely another lobbyist group. I would like to thank the committee for raising the issue of data versus dogma in support of improving the integrity of climate science. This concludes my testimony.
Thank you very much, Dr. Curry. Dr. Happer.
My name is William Happer. I recently retired from a career of 50 years of teaching physics at Princeton and Columbia Universities. As the chairman mentioned, I served as Director of Energy Research, Office of Energy Research and Department of Energy from 1990 to 1993. And among the other projects I supported there was the atmospheric radiation measurements program, which is still going strong with facilities all over the world to measure basic climate data. After leaving the Department of Energy, I served as Princeton University's equivalent for Vice President for Research from 1995 to 2005. I guess I'm best known in the scientific community for inventing the sodium guide star that's used on all modern telescopes to compensate for atmospheric turbulence. So I've been very involved with the atmosphere for a very long time. So I'd like to, Mark, could you advance the slides? There's all this talk about carbon pollution, which of course is meant carbon dioxide pollution, and I'd like to set the record straight that carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. We're sitting in this room breathing out carbon dioxide at 40,000 parts per million every time we breathe out. We're fundamentally in a carbon dioxide famine, geologically speaking now. If you look at the geological history of the Earth, most of the time CO2 levels have been 3 times, 4 times what they are now. The Earth was just fine then. And in fact, at the present time, you know, many plants are having a hard time performing as well as they're designed to perform because the CO2 levels are too low and the oxygen levels are too high. I won't go into the details, but there's not much dispute about that. So the issue is not that CO2 is a pollutant. It's actually very, very good for the world. The issue is what will it do to temperature? And Dr. Christie very clearly showed, Mark, could you advance a few slides? Yes. A version of this display here, which is in Nature magazine, peer-reviewed. It's anything but a skeptic journal. But what it shows in dark bars are the predictions of various climate models of how much warming there would be over 2 time intervals from a 10-year interval, a 20-year interval. The red bar is what's observed, and you notice that the observed warming is much, much less than the predictions of climate models. Dr. Christie's chart was another version of that for the atmosphere, the lower atmosphere, and this is actually for surface data. So but the message is the same for both sets of data, that the climate models on which we're making policy do not work. They don't work. Okay, so let me move on to the fact that CO2 is a very important part of life on Earth. Mark, could you advance one slide? And one more, please. Just to limit my time here, let me just show you this picture, which shows the greening of the planet from 1982 to 2010. And so this is satellite images of certain wavelength bands that allow you to tell how much plant life there is. And what you see is that over most of the Earth, contrary to what you might have heard, the Earth is getting greener. And this is also clear from crop yields. Crop yields are going up. Some of that's fertilizer, some of that is better cropping practices. But a good fraction of it is CO2, probably 30% of the increase. Well, 15% of the increase in crop yields is due to the 30% increase of CO2 we've had in the past 100 years. So to call CO2 a pollutant is just completely wrong-headed. Now, I'd like to conclude by, Mark, could you advance one more? Arguing to support Dr. Christie's urging that we have a red team. I'm calling it a team B, but you know, in most areas of science, science is so complicated that unless you have some adversarial process, you really can't be sure who's right. So, for example, when I was at Department of Energy, I didn't understand enough about nuclear weapons to know whether Livermore was right or Los Alamos was right, but I knew I could count on Livermore to catch any error in Los Alamos or vice versa. That's the reason we had two labs. It was that one could look after the other. We don't have two labs for climate. We have one organization, one world organization, the IPCC. We have one funding agency, you know, that follows IPCC, or, you know, and I would like to argue very strongly that we set aside some fraction of funding for climate research that is designed to be for the other side. So, for example, if you have some research that might show that CO2 is not such a big problem, you should be able to get funding. You shouldn't be last in line and turned away. That's the way it is in many other areas of human life. Even to become a saint in the Catholic Church, you have to pass a contested trial with the devil's advocate. You know, you can't be sainted without that. So every other region, every other aspect of human life has an adversarial process. This is the only one I know of that there's nothing adversarial in the science. And so I would like to argue to second Dr. Christie's request for a red team. And a team B also would be a good idea to have a real review of how well is science working. I know that there was a review of how well science works that both Dr. Christie and Dr. Curry took part in the American Physical Society. They did very well, and it was both sides. It was the only good review I know of. It was organized by Dr. Steve Koonin, and I noticed that when the list of organizations supporting climate alarmism was read, the one that wasn't there was the American Physical Society. Maybe that was an oversight. I hope not. I hope it was partly due to Dr. Curry and Dr. Christie, because it was a shattering workshop. So let me conclude my testimony here, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Happer, for being here. And I will say the one thing on which I think we can all agree is that no members of Congress will be made saints at any time in the foreseeable future. And Mr. Stein.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. I'm not a scientist. I'm an author. And I'm also one of the 7 billion people on this planet that the governments assembled in Paris currently are presuming to determine the future of. So I have an interest in that as much as anybody else. I've listened to the examples that Senator Peters and Senator Nelson gave of toxic infestation in Michigan water and tidal flooding in the streets of Miami Beach. Nothing agreed at Paris is going to do anything for that. If you expect the agreement at Paris to end the tidal flooding in Miami Beach, you're going to be waiting a long time. So if you want to do something about the tidal flooding in Miami Beach, the mayor of Miami Beach and the governor of Florida are the guys who should get together and do it. This body is called the Subcommittee, I believe the full name, on Science, Space and Competitiveness. And the most important competitiveness in any healthy society is competitiveness in ideas. That is how ideas are tested, and that is how good ideas win out over bad. And only a very weak idea demands that it must be protected from any criticism. Professor Ivor Javer, the Nobel Prize winner. By the way, when I say he's a Nobel Prize winner, I mean he's a real one. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1973, not a fraudulent Nobel Prize winner, like, unfortunately, large members of Rear Admiral Titley's faculty, Michael Mann, Richard Alley, William Easterling, all of whom have falsely claimed to be Nobel Prize winners on an industrial scale, as have many other climate scientists. There's never been a misrepresentation of credentials on this scale. It used to be a very serious business, but apparently it's not when your cause is, quote, saving the planet. But it is a revealing. It is this misrepresentation of credentials by people falsely claiming to be Nobel laureates is revealing, because it gets to the heart of the problem here, that they are attempting to cloak the science in an authority that it does not, in fact, possess. At any rate, Professor Java has compared the global warming orthodoxy to a hypothesis that you're not allowed to question. And it's gone beyond that in recent years. It's not only that you're not allowed to falsify the hypothesis, that the hypothesis is not in fact falsifiable, but that if you do, you suffer very serious consequences. Professor Christie and Professor Curry are very brave individuals, and they were very mild in their remarks about what Congressman Grijalva did when he sent out a disgraceful letter that no citizen representative in a parliament of a free society should be sending out to free individuals, demanding things like hotel expenses and email communication going back a decade. It was an absolutely disgraceful letter, and it represents the next stage of big climate enforcement. Your colleague, Senator Whitehouse, has called for the RICO laws about racketeering, to be used against those who disagree with him on climate science. When you need that, you're not dealing with science. You're effectively enforcing a state ideology. The Attorney General of New York is currently using securities law to do an end run around the First Amendment to chastise enemies of his who do not agree with him on the climate science. To take a milder example, Rear Admiral Titley has said that it is time, when it comes to global warming, it's time for the politicking to stop. Well, when you're calling for the politicking to stop, that is itself politicking, such as the Democrats on this committee who appeared at a press conference a couple of hours ago under a sign saying the debate is ended. I learned from Canada, in the battle I fought over free speech that Senator Cruz mentioned, I learned to always listen very carefully when someone is telling you to shut up. And although Rear Admiral Titley and the Democrat senators are doing it far more politely than Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Grijalva and the Attorney General of New York, what they're telling you is that this idea is so weak it cannot be subjected to the normal, vigorous debate of free society. So I thank this subcommittee for allowing at least to recognise that there is a divergence of opinion, the science is not settled, and the climate system of this planet is too complex for the slogans of cartoon climatology we're currently seeing in Paris. Thank you very much.